Well, welcome everybody to the Abound Harvest Showcase virtual series. We really appreciate you joining. This is the second webinar in the series and actually our third in the overall series because we launched in September on the 14th in Wellington, Colorado with an in-person Abound Harvest Showcase. Back then, when we were back in September, it seems like a long time ago now, we had a great turnout given COVID, followed a lot of the, we had a COVID protection plan in place approved by the county, but we had about 75 folks that attended and were able to come out in person. And we've got a short clip from one of those folks that was out there with us that we'll share with you. But we appreciate everybody joining. We're gonna, as we go through this, we've got 3 presenters and I will share the agenda in just a moment. We will have Q&A opportunities for you in between each presenter and also at the end. And we've also got a little housekeeping slide and we'll kind of share with you how to ask those questions. So with that, we'll jump into the agenda. What we're going to cover today is 3 areas. The first area is hemp for row crop farming. Firsthand observations, and Marguerite Bolt is the hemp production specialist from Purdue University, and the most amazing university in the United States, but of course that's because I'm an alum, but you may think there are others that are equally good. At any rate, Marguerite's going to share with us, she's been working with growers in the state of Indiana for the last 2 to 3 years, so she's going to share what she's seen and share some insights of things that you should be considering if you're thinking about growing hemp for the first time or going to grow hemp again, having grown it in the past. Then we're going to move on to Dr. Rich Fletcher, who's the Director of Breeding here at New West Genetics. And Dr. Fletcher is going to talk about breeding for best results. So as we think about scaling up your hemp crop for high CBD and grain and potentially fiber as we go forward, how do we think about breeding at New West Genetics and what are those things that we select for to ensure success in a row crop style setting? And then finally, I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the Abound family of varieties. Rich will share a few new ones that we're launching in 2021. And we'll talk about a trial program that we're launching this year in 2021, as well as taking a look at some of the return on investment information. We have an example that we've put together to share with you. So with that, we'll go ahead and move into our video of our event day.
My family and I have been looking for a grain and CBD and fiber variety that can be harvested with conventional methods, row crop, for a couple of years now. Kind of seems like this variety's kind of got it all together.
So that was a brief video. If you would like to see a longer video, it's on our website around the virtual sharing site. So feel free to go check that out at newwestgenetics.com. And you can see the full video. It's kind of nice to be able to see the crop in the field, what it looks like and what you can expect when you plant Abound and once it gets to maturity. A few housekeeping things we want to share. So as I mentioned at the start, we will have Q&A opportunities multiple times throughout the call. The webinar is 1 hour long. So if you would submit your questions live, you can click on Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom window. And then we'll have that Q&A coverage after each presentation, as I mentioned. So feel free to type your questions in and we will read through those questions after each presenter. And then once we're done, and I'll show this again at the end, the video recording will be available via YouTube. We'll be sending a link out to everyone who's participated today. You can feel free to share that with others. So as we get started, the thing I wanted to maybe lead in with before we jump over to Marguerite is just to share, as we think about hemp at New West, there's a lot of information out there about hemp, some of it true, some of it false, much of it in between. But what we try to focus on as a genetics company, as a seed genetics company in the hemp world, are 3 things. One, how do you seed your success to ensure that if you decide to get into hemp, that you can be a successful farmer? And around those topics are really strictly the agronomics. What are those things you can do to be successful? Second, peace of mind. And for me, this is a big one because we only make claims that we can back and that you can count on. That doesn't seem like it should be a huge statement, but unfortunately in the hemp world it is, because there's a lot of claims that are made that are absolutely not true. There's some bad actors. And so we're very proud of the fact that we are based in sound science. We've been breeding and doing research and development in the hemp world for the last 7 years. Rich will share more about that with you. And so that's something that we really hang our hat on. And as I mentioned, return on investment. So if you've looked at other options for high CBD, primarily feminized seedlings or clones, that is an option that many farmers go with. It is very heavy hand labor and high seed cost, as well as a lot of labor costs. And I think that Marguerite will touch on that a little bit on what she has seen in Indiana throughout, her years of experience. The other thing I wanted to just touch on, and we'll kind of hit on this several times throughout the webinar, since this is about how to seed your success or select the right seed, which we really believe that success does start with the seed that you choose. Many people, if they're growing for high CBD, that is the main thing they focus on. How can I buy the seed genetics that are going to give me the highest possible CBD content? And while we would agree that that is one key component of your decision-making process, we don't believe that is the only thing that you should focus on. We feel strongly that the number one thing that you should focus on are agronomic traits, and that is high germ, making sure that that seed, when it's in the ground, is going to grow for you and is going to yield the results that you are looking for. The second equally important piece is compliance. So total THC being less than 0.3% so that it is legally hemp and not marijuana. We have had growers across the US in the 2020 season who have grown hot hemp and have had to plow that crop under. And that's a very painful experience for growers, which we do not want you to have to go through. So that's a really very, very important factor when you're selecting your seed genetics. The next one, as I mentioned earlier, is cost of production. So how much does it cost you to grow this crop? And if you can mechanize and scale when you're growing hemp, then obviously you can drop your hand labor and increase your ROI. And then finally, as I mentioned, CBD content is an important piece. We highly recommend that when people share the CBD content with you of the seed that they're selling you, that you ensure you understand that that's across the total flower biomass and not just the top bud or the highest potential CBD that one single bud at a plant could yield. So those are the things that we will talk a little bit about and encourage you to ask questions on as you go into the 2021 season to make your decisions. With that, Marguerite, I will turn it over to you. I'll stop sharing. Hang on just a minute. There's a slight pause here. I will stop sharing and let you start sharing.
All right. Thanks, Jenny. I'll get this pulled up. My name is Marguerite Bolt. I'm gonna find my PowerPoint now. I am the hemp extension specialist at Purdue University. I am really excited to talk with you about hemp production, what I've seen as an educator. Don't know why my screen's not sharing. Oh, that's so weird.
Is it giving you a hard time?
Yeah, it's just not showing up anymore, even though my PowerPoint's open.
That's all right. Did you click share screen? I assume it's just not taking.
Yeah, it's just not, the share screen isn't showing my actual PowerPoint on the screen as an option. Show all windows here. Let's see. Okay, there we go. I don't know how many people have met scientists, but all of the ones I know have 100 tabs open. I have about 100. I have 5 Excel documents, 8 PDFs, a bunch of Word documents. We're just kind of scatterbrained. But I want to just give a brief introduction of how I got here. If you couldn't tell already, I'm kind of a bug nerd. There's a giant predator behind my head. I'm trained as an entomologist. I got my bachelor's at Michigan State University. I worked primarily with fruit crops, which is a big type of crop production in the state of Michigan. And then I kind of just fell into hemp production. I got an email from a researcher looking for a student, and I said, hey, I'm going to try something new. So I moved to Indiana and started working on hemp in 2017, finished my master's, and then got offered a position as the first hemp extension specialist for the state of Indiana. And in this position, I've gotten to work with, several hundred different growers in the state. I work with industry members, including processors, lots of people in the supply chain. And then I also work with legislators and policymakers and just try to bring fact-based information to people in the state so they can understand hemp and figure out how it better integrates into kind of our agricultural model in Indiana and the greater Midwest, which is why I want to talk to you about CBD production as a row crop, kind of from a extension and grower perspective, some of the advantages and disadvantages, as well as what to prepare for, like Jenny said, whether you're a new hemp grower or looking to transition into this production model. There's some important considerations that I'll cover briefly. So I recently wrote an article for hemp growers discussing this novel production model. So check that out if you want to read more in depth about advantages and disadvantages that I presented. But one of the big things for people in the Midwest is that there's no concern of this cross-pollination in feminized high yielding CBD system. You are paying specifically for females, or in a clone system, you're paying for those females. You don't want pollen drift. So if your neighbor's growing for grain and fiber, or if you're in the Midwest and there's feral or wild hemp around, there's a huge concern about that pollen drift, which you're not going to see in this dioecious system where you have males and females and you're producing for seed and CBD and stock material. It's just one huge, huge advantage because we have all different types of hemp production in most states. It's highly mechanized, which is great for our row crop growers. I would never expect a farmer to buy transplanters, bed shapers, plastic laborers, and hire a whole crew because that leads to a high cost of production. Hemp can be really costly to produce in a horticultural model, with models out of Tennessee and Kentucky putting, cost of production, including seeds and licensing, at about $15,000 an acre, which is just super unrealistic. In my opinion, based on how much production we are seeing in the US at this point. So looking at a row crop model that fits into existing systems is really going to be advantageous for growers if we want to see, kind of long-term sustainability of hemp in the US. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the disadvantages that I'm hearing from growers and that I kind of see as an educator. Jenny brought up CBD content. Processors are really looking for high CBD flower material. They're looking for that 10%, whether that's achievable while remaining THC compliant. That's pretty easy to say. I see most of the material from growers coming in between 7 and 8%, not usually reaching that 10%. There's a lot of research starting to look at, or has been CBD to THC ratios. So once you get above 10% CBD, you're really gonna push past that 0.3% THC. So, that's just something you have to think about in each of these systems of CBD content and compliancy. That's super important. And then, finding a processor may be challenging. Like I said, they're looking for that 10%. There are processors out there though that want consistency. They want material that doesn't have any, seeds mixed in. They want clean material. They don't want to deal with those whole flowers that, you shuck off the plant. So this may be perfect for them. They may want material like what you're getting off of, row crop CBD production. And then there's kind of like a more kind of philosophical sustainability-based question in general, and this isn't specific to row crop CBD production, just crop production in general, any crop. But do we need large-scale production to meet current demands? And that's something we've seen with the price of hemp just drop. And as more products get developed and we get, more feedback from FDA and from regulators about what CBD kind of falls into categorically, this may change, but it's just something to think about. Do we need large scale production? And if the answer is we don't need massive acreage, maybe it works better for people to just transition a row crop model and not have the high cost of production. It's just something to keep in mind as you enter into this journey. Check out economic reports, check out hemp benchmarks. These resources are really helpful to figure out how much you even want to grow. So a couple of things that I hear from growers and that I've seen as an educator that I just want everybody to be really aware of are, firstly, seed standards. I know Rich is going to talk about this and Jenny mentioned it, but having a seed label is absolutely necessary, and legally all crops need to have a seed label like the one shown on the screen. Purdue has a great little publication about how to test and label seeds. Every state has an AOSCA lab that you can send seed to and get, you know, purity, germination, noxious weed. You can get all of these things measured at a pretty low cost. But with hemp growers, I often don't see them submitting seeds because they're working in a feminized system where it's $1 a seed. And so they're not going to send any seed in if they're paying that much. It's just not worth it to them in their mind. But consider that it's really important to do your own testing through a certified lab as well. And then one of the huge advantages of, you know, New West Genetics and working with them is the fact that you're going to get certified seed, which is a gold standard in pretty much every other crop that's produced. But in hemp, we don't see that. And so having a company that understands the seed certification process and understands breeding is a huge advantage, you know, for a grower, because there's so much uncertainty in the hemp industry. You know, if you want at least one thing to be certain, start with really, really good seed. There are a couple other considerations for growing. One of those things is planting. When do you plant? How do you prepare for planting? You know, Jenny's going to talk more about ABOUND and purchasing seed early, but that's super important. When we get ready to do research, it can be pretty high stakes for us, just like it's high stakes for farmers to get seed in the ground. So what we do is we get our seed as early as we can in the winter. We weigh everything out. We get everything prepared. We calibrate planters ahead of time, because one of the biggest issues we see, especially in the Midwest, is really wet springs. And so this is a survey from 2019. Most of our growers had a planting issue due to weather. They just couldn't get into the field. It was way too wet. They're in a poorly drained site. It just didn't work. So consequently, most of the hemp was planted in June and July. For direct seeded hemp, especially if you're trying to get a grain crop, we're looking late April to early June, ideally for this region. I saw that somebody was from Florida. You're going to have totally different standards for when you plant. You're likely going to be able to plant a lot earlier, but there are great educators in Florida to talk to about that, including Zachary Brim. He's at University of Florida. Another big consideration is weed management. This goes for any type of hemp production. Plan ahead for how you're going to manage weeds. Hemp is not very competitive in the first 3 to 4 weeks when it's direct seeded. Transplanting is a whole different story. This is the slow growth phase, and that's that bottom photo right there. You can see some common ragweed. There's some velvet leaf coming up. That's between rows. That's between 7.5-inch row spacing. And then that top photo is after canopy closure. You can't really see any weeds underneath that canopy. But to achieve, you know, healthy plants that have a good canopy like that, you need to control the weeds during that slow growth phase, whether that's mechanical weeding with wider row spacing, 30-inch row spacing, or controlling weeds before planting. This is something we've seen as super, super important and doesn't seem to be talked about enough among new growers, because hemp is touted as a super competitive, fast growing plant, which is true, but it does have a period where you need to manage those weeds. There's some other ways you can do this, selecting clean fields that don't have, you know, a really built up seed bank. You haven't had serious weed problems in the last couple of years. Looking at cover crops, looking at previous crop rotation. If you're a row crop farmer, you know, considering, hey, what herbicides did I apply in the last 2 years? What's my weed control look like? And, you know, would this be a good field to plant into because I've been able to manage weeds with these specific herbicides? But lastly, there's one caveat to this, and that's carryover. Wisconsin has put together a great sheet with a bunch of different products and rotation restrictions based on labels. It's not specific to hemp. Hemp falls into the other crop category. We have limited research on carryover and hemp, but we know what happens. This is from a photo earlier this summer. I don't know what herbicide was applied, or weed scientists determined it was a carryover issue, not a drift issue. But this was a field where all the plants were starting to look like this. They had this kind of mutation, mutilated, curled leaves, looked really bad, were stunted. And this was a problem with carryover specifically. So that's something to consider, as well as, you know, refer to that resource, refer to your labels, and then make decisions based on those. This is my contact information. I usually give like 1 to 2 hour long lectures. So I tried to, you know, speed up and condense that. But if you have questions, give me a call, send me an email, check out our website. We have social media, all that stuff. But I'm going to pass it on to Rich.
Great. Thanks, Marguerite. Appreciate it.
Questions? I don't know.
So before we jump to Rich, yeah, we'll see what questions we have. What Marguerite mentioned, she usually gives, hour-long plus talks on hemp, which I really appreciate you condensing it down. She has a ton of knowledge. So whatever questions you have, based on some of the points she mentioned, feel free to ask them now, and then we'll jump over to Rich. So Sarah, do you have some questions? It looks like we do.
Yeah, we've got a couple from David. We're in Florida and needing a plant that can handle heat and humidity. I think this was just a general point, wanting seed that can handle Florida. And also, can we coat hemp seed?
So I can, for the Florida one, like I said, there's ongoing research at University of Florida, and they have hemp trials, I think at 3 stations across the state, with the southernmost one being near Homestead. So really hot and humid, subtropical down there. I can't say how, specifically the new West Genetics seed would work there. I know they had a lot of success with seed from China, specific for fiber production. But I would reach out directly to someone at UF at one of those field stations. They have an agroecologist that's working on hemp that is great. His name is Zachary. I don't know if it's Brim or Berm.
Brim, Zach Brim.
Zach Brim. Yeah, he's great. So refer to that. On the coating hemp seeds, no. Hemp seeds cannot be coated with any kind of treatment legally, because there's nothing labeled for hemp that would work as a seed treatment. There may be some of these like organic certified fungicides that are being trialed that may be a possibility, but they're not looking too hot, at least for pathogen control. So we're not at that point where we have treated seed, if that's what you meant.
I think you can use like some inert material that sort of standardize seed size and better singulate, but you're right, any sort of pesticides are a no-go right now.
Yeah.
Great. Sarah, next question.
Yeah, are there any external factors which influence CBD content?
I don't know if Rich wants to go over this because of all Dr. McKay's work looking at this, but genetics is the #1 thing that's going to control CBD content. It's based on the research that's been done. It seems really minor that external factors are going to affect this. There's a lot of people doing ongoing research looking at different fertility programs, different stressors. There's people doing insect-related research and damage on plants to see if there's any kind of change in overall cannabinoid content. Terpenes are a whole nother story. Those are likely going to change due to stress. But genetics, like our seed guy says, genetics are the most important thing.
We would agree with that.
Yeah, we totally agree with that. The only external factor to really consider is your harvest management, the way you harvest it. That's a place where you can lose CBD. So it was there, but you manage the crop inappropriately and you end up with a lesser product.
Yeah, and so we do actually recommend that you test very close to harvest. You have to test for compliance anyway, but testing your crop in a way that would help you to see what your CBD content is across the plant, so that you can then evaluate your harvest process afterwards. Other questions, Sarah?
Yeah, do you recommend planting into a cover crop for weed management?
So this is something that is currently being researched by Purdue and Rodale and some and Michael Fields and some other private entities as well. We're still trying to figure out what that ideal cover crop would be. Rye shows some promise. Terminating it is the challenge. So for organic growers, they may be familiar with roller clippers. And that can be a way to terminate it. But these seeds are so small, we're trying to figure out how do we get the perfect depth and make sure they can get through that like thick mat. The option of spraying an herbicide and terminating a cover crop is a possibility, but each state has their own rules on herbicide application in a field that's registered for hemp. So in the state of Indiana, we can't do any kind of burn down once that field is registered for hemp production. So you had a cover crop you were terminating in April, Because that field was registered in January, it's technically a hemp site. We're trying to work on some of the wording to offer some leeway for growers for that. But I've seen hemp successfully get planted late, really late into wheat stubble and do okay. But then you're pushing that planting pretty late, so that's kind of challenging. I haven't seen it successfully planted into any kind of like clover cover. It just doesn't seem to do as well as far as direct seeding and competition in the beginning. I've seen it transplanted into clover, it does okay. We terminated vetch and then planted hemp, and it did really well. And then, like I said, rye I've seen a couple times do pretty well, but the figuring out termination is challenging, especially if you're in an organic system. You're not gonna spray an herbicide. There's a cover crop private consultant out of Pennsylvania called Steve Groff that's working with hemp, and he's actually a really great resource. And then Rodale has some research on their website with cover crop rotations, but that's a Midwest perspective. I have no idea what it's looking like out west or down south.
Thanks, Marguerite. So Sarah, maybe one more question, then we'll go to Rich, then we'll come back to more questions after Rich.
Any suggestions for growing organically without chemical inputs?
Yeah, I would say if you're already familiar with organic management techniques, whether that's for diseases, insects, weeds, fertility, you can apply those to hemp. It's a pretty heavy feeder, but kind of rely on some of those other techniques, especially for weed management. Look at mechanical cultivation. You know, just because we don't have a ton of cover crop research, that's something to kind of look into and talk with other growers. We have all kinds of growers trying different things. But technically, from a herbicide, insecticide, any kind of pesticide standpoint, everything that's allowed for use on hemp through EPA, I'm pretty sure is organic certified. It's OMRI labeled. So the only thing that would make hemp not organic would be, you know, is your field certified organic and what's your fertility input? So most growers are growing at least in an organic method without being certified, but there's some value added benefits to certified organic hemp. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Marguerite. I really appreciate it. We're going to switch to Rich, and then I see a number of questions on the chat and on the Q&A, so we'll come back after Rich's talk and answer some more.
Okay, you want me to share?
I can share on here if you like. I've got your slides.
Okay, great, perfect. Okay, thanks. So New West, we started back in 2014, the day that hemp became legal here in Colorado, which effectively makes us the longest running breeding program here in the US today. So we are using traditional breeding methods, basically founded on collection of lots of data across multiple years to make our decisions. And so in that, we do like to utilize third parties such as universities and departments of ag to generate objective, you know, third-party data, really to validate the conclusions we're making. So thanks to Marguerite for being on today. Next slide, please.
Oops, hang on a second. There we go.
Okay, so our goal from the start, way back in 2014, was really to combine the agronomy of traditional grain type hemp that's grown throughout the world today, this row crop idiotype, with the high cannabinoid genetics of what was at that time really an emerging CBD industry, with this end goal of creating row crop dual purpose grain and CBD types. So for the breeders on the line, we are using a recurrent selection approach where we do have to include the breeding value of the male as well as the female plants. We are breeding, as has been mentioned, dioecious varieties, and so those male genotypes are contributing to the fitness and performance of the variety itself. And so this is a unique aspect of breeding hemp that my former life was in breeding hybrid canola. This was not the case there. So I have our selection criteria listed on the right side of the slide here. Many of the row crop traits we've been talking about are listed there, but this is in order of priority. If you can go back. The number one priority since day one has been THC compliance. And that's because, breeding canola, there wasn't a trait where if we missed the mark, it was a federal offense. So we do take this part very, very serious. All right, now we can move on. So like I mentioned, we're using traditional breeding methods, which essentially starts with crossing two varieties or plants with different genetic backgrounds. We harvest the seed from that cross, we plan out that progeny population, we collect data on that, and we use that data to advance the best individuals. And so for all of the traits that we're selecting upon, we actually see this bell-shaped continuous distribution you see in the figure here. And so which trait we're selecting upon will dictate which side of this distribution we're interested in. So I just mentioned THC compliance. We're going to be selecting individuals on the left side of that x-axis with low THC values. And this is where breeding and the complexity of breeding is highlighted. We also are now weighing that low THC compliance with traits on the right side of the distribution, very complex traits like yield for flour and grain. So next slide, please. All right, so here's a drone image of some of our small plot trials. Each one of these plots is essentially 6 feet by 12 feet, and it's not advancing, it's not playing. Ginny?
Yeah, hang on, let me see if I can
Okay.
properly. I'll go back.
But
we
as the drone flies over, you're going to see quite a bit of variation from plot to plot in the thick planted plots. And then you'll also notice we have these low density plots in here. Those are feminized varieties we buy off the open market and we include as checks really to benchmark against this low density, high CBD production method that's standard in the US today. Okay. So next slide, please. So this, we've talked a lot about certified seed, but for us here, this really is the end of the breeding process, would be taking a new variety and getting it certified, really the ultimate validation that what we've done is of high quality. And like I said, Marguerite's already mentioned that, but I'm going to describe the process here in Colorado because there is some added value to what we're doing here for growers. So essentially the process starts at the point when the breeder will provide a variety description to the AOSCA Variety Review Board. So AOSCA is the Association of Official Seed Certifying Agencies, and they really oversee the whole process. The variety description is really a demonstration by the breeder that they know what they've bred and can predict what it's going to look like in the field. So once that document is okayed by the Variety Review Board, the seed would then be planted. So the seed production field would be inspected by an AOSCA certifying agent on a couple of occasions, basically to confirm that what the breeder says it's going to look like, it actually does. They're also looking for weeds and pests and other bad things, essentially. And at the same time here in Colorado, that seed would be taken by the Department of Ag and actually grown at multiple locations throughout the state. And at the end of the season, they'll measure THC content and confirm that the variety is less than 0.3%. And so if the variety passes these two tests, it is then okayed for the final test, which is what Marguerite was talking about. The seed will be analyzed by a certified lab to confirm, and I think, Jenny, we can move to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah, to confirm that it is high germ. It is low in weed seeds and other pathogens, pests. And once that's confirmed, the end, I guess the end goal here is a tag like what you see here. This is actually issued by our AOSCA agent here in Colorado. This tag shows what those seed lab results are. And it also has this very important sentence here that this variety of seed has been verified by the Department of Ag to be less than 0.3. So really going back to what I said at the beginning, that first slide, third-party validation, and this, you know, not only is the seed high quality, but the genetics are pure and will not exceed that 0.3% THC. I think that's my last slide.
Great. Thanks, Rich. So if anyone has any questions, Sarah, it looks like we have some more. Do you want to throw those out? It could be for Rich, it could be for Marguerite.
Yeah, we had one. Are there any other practices you would suggest based for weed control before planting industrial hemp?
I guess it depends on what state you're in. I would recommend some sort of herbicide burn down if possible, but then it becomes tillage. We are messing around with earlier planting. So a lot of the dicot weed species that are a problem in our area require really high soil temperatures to germinate. So if we can get that crop in the ground and established before that happens, you know, we get ahead of that weed flush early.
And how long does it take before the crop has a good surface coverage to prevent weeds?
So we've seen, I think it depends on when you plant. The number of days will depend on when you plant. In the scenario I just explained, it's going to take more total days from planting to canopy. But you know, we're averaging around the 20th of May here, and it'll canopy within 50 days.
Okay. And how do you determine the contribution of male parents into the variety? Rich?
I don't. Biology does. It has a sex chromosome. And so right now, effectively half of the population is male and half is female. We have filed IP on genetics that skew that ratio to a higher proportion of females. That is, the females make all of the harvestable goods, and I think 50% males is far more than enough pollen. So skewing that and having more females in the field will be a yield advantage.
That's all we have for now.
Rich, how soon will we have that available?
Always have to put me on the spot.
Yeah, see, I'm the commercial person. He's the breeder, so I have to push him.
We're a few years out here, 24.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. So we'll continue on then. Hang on, let me see if I can get these slides to advance. And basically what I wanted to share with you is a little bit of information on the new varieties that we're launching this year. So 2020 was our first year launching our ABOUND family, and we sold NWG 2730. We will continue to sell that variety. It's been extremely successful, and we'll continue to sell that into 2021, 2022, and beyond. But we're also introducing 3 new varieties, and we do have a limited quantity of these new varieties as we're getting them out there, and this will be our first test in a commercial setting. Obviously, we've done a lot of testing over the years in our own breeding and development situations that Rich has described quite a bit of. So as Rich described earlier, kind of how we select, this really continues to bring high CBD, low THC. Those are 2 of the big characteristics that were selected for when Rich was bringing forward these 3 new varieties. We can expect higher CBD than 2730. So 2730 today, we expect between 6 and 6.5% CBD with compliant THC. In these 3 new ones, we would expect that CBD level to be higher, potentially up to 7 or slightly above 7% CBD with stronger agronomic traits. So more uniformity in the field, et cetera. So as Rich continues selecting and we go to the next iteration and the next iteration after that, we continue to develop genetics that are even better as we go forward. So I wanted to share that with you, kind of the new things that you can be looking for when you look at the results. So this is based on our own our own trials. And these were small plot trials that Rich showed you the video of. So limited data on the new varieties for the specific small plot, but obviously we collect data every single year, and that's what helps us to select which variety we're going to advance and how we got to these 3 that are coming out in 2021. But you can see if you compare them to 2730, slightly higher seed yield, flower yield, less fiber as we select for those seed and flower, the grain and flower characteristics, the fiber quantity goes down. So depending on the grower and what you're growing for, if you're looking for a tri-crop and you want to have that fiber as well, and there's a market for it in your area, then 2730 may be the best fit for you so that you can spread your opportunities of those three potential outcomes of your crop a little bit more evenly. If not, then you can obviously look at some of these others. So as I mentioned, you can see down at the variety, higher CBD content, stronger agronomic traits, and certified by the Colorado Department of Ag for THC compliance, which is extremely important for all of us. So I also wanted to share with you a field trial program that we're kicking off. You can see the prices of the varieties on the left, and also the fact that we are offering an early cash discount on all of these varieties of 20% off until December 31st. Very similar to most row crop models for selling seed that you see with corn, soybeans, cotton, etc. I'm kind of showing where I come from because I sold corn and soybeans for a long, long time. But as Marguerite mentioned, we really highly recommend that you make your seed decisions early. You get your seed purchased, and then you're ready to go start calibrating your planter and thinking of all those things. Many times I think growers wait until late in the season because they're waiting for prices to come down, quite frankly, on seed. And so they want to wait into May or even sometimes June to make the purchase. Now you have to wait for that seed to get to you. And if you're planting mid-June or later, it's very, very late in most parts of the country. So you definitely want to try to get that in mid-May to early June, if not a little bit before, as both Rich and Marguerite have already talked about. So let's talk a little bit about the field trial program. This year in 2020, we entered a number of field trials with universities across the United States and Canada. We were in fact in 9 different university trials. And so for each of those universities, they had multiple sites, some of them 3 sites, some 4, some 5. So we got a lot of coverage. In Canada, I can't remember the exact number of sites, Rich, you probably know, but I think it was 8 or 9 sites in Canada. And we're waiting for all that data to come back right now. So university trials are really, really helpful. They can be challenging too, because they are small plot trials and some weather factors. So we mentioned Zach Brim in Florida. He did have ABOUND and our Elite, which is our grain family of varieties, in those trials, and they were knocked out by a hurricane, which is unfortunate. So for 2020, we don't have those results. We were in Vermont, we were in Midwestern states, North Dakota, a number of places. And so challenges can be weather. For trial purposes, we get put into the trial with grain varieties because of the pollination. So they don't want to put us in the CBD trials because those are feminized, which is fine. And we can still do extremely well. Unfortunately, sometimes the CBD content doesn't get captured and they don't do the test for that. They do many times. So I'm sharing that with you because while it's beneficial to be in the university trials, it's really beneficial for us to get real on-farm commercial data. And that's what our goal is with this 4x4 field trial program that we're launching. So how does it work? Basically, our minimum purchase is for you to buy 10 acres of ABOUND, whichever varieties that you choose. And if you will put at least 4 acres into a trial where you're planting 3 or more of our varieties, 2730, 4000, 4113 or 2463. You can plant all 4, and then you test and track. We'll provide you with a protocol that you would follow. I'll go to the next slide so you can see that. It's a little difficult to read it, but we'll ask you to track a number of different factors so that we can learn from your farm and we can share that data with growers next year. And you can also learn from your farm. We would encourage you to work with your agronomist or any other expert on your farm or your university extension person. As you've heard from Marguerite, she has a lot of experience, would be a great person to talk to as you start, if you decide to start into one of these trials, or one of her colleagues in another state. So basically, we want to gather that data from commercial, real world use. You can obviously put more acres than 4 in there. We will reimburse for, or credit your account, if you will, for next year's purchases for half of the cost of those 4 acres. So if you buy 10 and you want to put 10 acres in the trial, that's great. We'll still credit you for 2 acres of the seed that you've purchased for next year. And that'll give us an opportunity to get actual real on-farm data. And you can see we want to collect information from pre-planting, planting, in season, harvest, and then we will have some real robust data to share. If you're familiar with University of Illinois, Phil Alberti is the extension person, Marguerite's colleague there. He's working on a database for Illinois, but he's also working with educators across other states to see if that can be expanded nationally across the US so that we can get data on multiple different varieties of hemp. So this program, he's also going to share with his growers so that they can gather a lot more data to be part of that database as well. So that's how the 4x4 program works. We're hoping to enroll a number of growers so we can get some great data for real world commercial data. Finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about return on investment. And so obviously a big question when you're going to plant hemp for the first time, or if you've already planted hemp and going forward, is how much does it cost and how much can I make? And what are some of these other hidden pieces to this? So this isn't the whole picture, but this is the picture of buying the seed, planting the seed, harvesting the seed. What does that cost? And then obviously selling your flour or your grain or your fiber. If we look at the top, there's 3 revenue streams that we've talked about that are 3 potential revenue streams from Abound. Our flour biomass, that's where your CBD comes from. Your nutritious grain, which could be conventional or organic, depending on your growing method, and fiber. So we've broken this into a few different categories along the left-hand side, which is, first of all, yield. When you think about the expected yield, about 1,300 pounds of flour biomass and of grain, and about 4,000 pounds of fiber. Those numbers can vary dramatically depending on the date you plant, how much water that seed gets before emergence, what you fertilize with, and very much so on your harvest method and timing. So we work with you very closely, and your agronomist and your extension person can also help with how do you maximize that yield based on those things that are within your control. 97% germ is the test that we've had on 2730 from the Department of Ag. So that gives you a yield of 1,261 pounds. For the purposes of this example, I've put our CBD in at the low end of 6%. As again, 2730 is 6 to 6.5. The newer varieties would be higher than that. And the way that you get paid for your flour typically is pounds of yield of flour biomass times percent CBD. So when you multiply the 1261 times the 6, then you get to this 7566 number. Today, Hemp Benchmarks puts the price right around 46 cents. And Marguerite mentioned Hemp Benchmarks earlier. There's other marketplaces for hemp that you can look at. That's probably on the low end. And many of the experts would estimate that we are at the low point in the hemp market with FDA approvals and other regulatory approvals that we expect very soon. We expect that market to grow, the demand to grow, and then obviously the price to go up. So when you figure out then your gross profit per acre, $34.80 sounds pretty good, right? However, there are costs. So when you look at your seed cost, we use the price of $27.30 before any discounts, which is $1,900. Labor, Marguerite made a great point. When you're planting feminized clones or seedlings, you may get slightly higher CBD, but your labor cost is dramatically higher. And I think she talked about anywhere for labor alone, somewhere between $4,000 and $10,000 an acre. You would have to talk to individual growers. We've talked to many, and the number that people estimate varies widely. So if we put our labor at $500 an acre, because it's mechanized and you're going to be planting with a planter, you're going to be potentially cultivating a couple of times, and then harvesting with a combine or any other method, but basically mechanized labor. And then finally, flour drying. This is an example from one grower, and you can kind of see down below. He said that 50 cents per percent was what he paid for drying. So that got him to $6.50. Total for drying costs per acre, seed separation was $50 in this example. Again, this changes depending on your methods. So when you calculate that out, your total costs are $3,100. Your net return then is $380.36. That's just from the flour. You also then can look at your grain, conventional and organic. You can see the prices. And then fiber today maybe it was about zero, but we did calculate a slight return up for this one grower. So a lot of information, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of how to calculate that. And we can share this with you, have a conversation with you and put in your own numbers. So with that, I'm going to pause and Sarah, turn it over to you to see what questions we have either for myself or for Marguerite or for Rich.
Yeah, what do we recommend for row spacing?
Great question. So we don't really recommend a specific row spacing. We've had a lot of good results with our customers with 30-inch rows. And the reason that we've been successful at 30-inch rows is it gives you enough row spacing to bring a cultivator through. And so as we focus on that mechanized process and weed control, that gives you a chance to clear those weeds out a couple times before canopy. We have had folks that have drilled 7.5-inch rows. There's different row spacing. But you want to get that canopy. You want to be close enough so that when you hit canopy that you are shading out any weed pressure. Rich, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it depends on your farm and what you expect for weed pressure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the tools you have available.
Sarah, other questions?
And what about, are we breeding for any abiotic factors like weather and sunlight, things like that?
Yeah, so we have breeding sites from approximately 32 degrees latitude all the way up to close to 50. So we're breeding for photo period response. And then I mentioned that earlier planting and trying to get a canopy or a stand established early on in the spring. That's certainly breeding for cold tolerance and germination under cooler soil temperatures.
In fiber, how would that break out as herd or bust?
We're just starting to do our fiber research and understanding some of the details of fiber qualities now. So I don't have a good answer for what the ratio of herd to bast would be across our varieties today.
But we are, as Rich said, doing some research with growers and also some universities. This trial work we're waiting to get back. So we should have an answer for that sometime soon, but we don't have it today.
Okay, what is the recommended style for drying flour?
Rich, do you want to touch on that? I can also share what I've heard from folks we're working with.
Yeah, most of our experience here has been field drying because we're in a warm, arid climate in Colorado. I know there are companies, so there's plenty of high throughput drying technology out there. The hops industry utilizes it, and there are hemp specific companies out there today, IEC Thermal being one of them, but not enough experience for me to recommend any one of them.
Yeah, I was thinking IEC Thermo, who's one of our strategic partners, and they've got a number of locations around in Florida as well as Illinois and different parts of the country, Colorado. HPP is another totally different drying system, but they also do harvest and drying. So there are a number of different folks out there, and if you reach out, we can help connect you to different folks. You can talk to people to see what works best for you.
And any experience growing near outdoor cannabis grows? Any advice that we can offer?
I guess if you don't want to pollinate the outdoor cannabis grow, make sure you're as far away from it as possible. I don't know of any direct experience that we've had with outdoor cannabis growers. They haven't come and knocked on our door, but yeah, the further the pollen is away, the better.
That's all we have for the moment.
Great. Well, I'd just like to thank everybody. I'll kind of jump along here. I did want to just share, this was the hemp benchmarks that I had mentioned earlier with some of the pricing. So you can see what they're putting the price at in different areas. This was October, so there is a more recent update, but they also talked about the market stabilizing and seeming to be an uptick in November. So we'll be updating that with the November data. And finally, we will have this webinar is being recorded. And so we will be posting that just as we did with the first webinar. If you weren't able to attend our first webinar, you can go on our website at newwestgenetics.com and click on the virtual series, and you'll see a video from our showcase in September, live and in person, as well as our first webinar. Sarah, do you know how long it'll take before we'll have this one up and posted?
We should be able to get there by Thursday, I'd say. Maybe sooner than that.
Perfect. So you can check that out. If you have any further questions, as it says here, please send them to us at info@newwestgenetics.com, and we'll get those answered as quickly as we can. Like to thank Marguerite for joining us and sharing her experiences in Indiana. Just want to say, boiler up, and thank you everybody for joining us. And we'll have another webinar coming up here in January. We'll be sending you the dates and more information on the topics at that time. So thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thanks.
All right, let me see here. Hang on, got to figure out how I can, there we go.